Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. So this is going to be a video on organizational behavior, kind of an introduction to it. What is organizational behavior? So broadly defined, academically defined, a field of study devoted to understanding, explaining, and ultimately improving the attitudes and behaviors of individuals and groups in organizations. And obviously, there's a huge variance, a huge dispersion with respect to how organizations operate, what kind of employees they have, what are their goals and objectives. You have non-profits, you have for-profits, you have government entities, so on and so forth. Um, Great question too. Yeah, does organizational behavior matter? Why do we care? Well, the firms that do an effective job of managing organizational behavior concepts become more profitable as a result. So we're thinking about this through the lens of a for-profit enterprise. So what makes a resource valuable? And this is what we call the resource-based view of the firm, right? So we have the inimitable features here, the history of the firm, a lot of very small decisions that think about like how your life works, right? Every day you make a lot of sort of small decisions that sort of help you hopefully achieve your larger objectives. And of course, yeah, socially complex resources. There's a huge diversity of talent, of people, of technology. Some firms are very up with that. AI is a good example. Some firms are really embracing that. Other firms are they think they know they'll have to, but they're sort of a little shy, probably a little scared about tackling it. And all these things sort of move into sort of amalgamated into this idea of resource value. So how do we know about what causes things like people to stay healthy, children to grow up happy, and also more focus on this class, employees to be satisfied with their jobs? Well, I mean, and this is not an exhaustive list, obviously. We can look at experience, we can look at intuition, we can look at the authority, and we can also look at science. Think about the experimental method. So the scientific method, this kind of deals with, would really start with, sort of a theory and then a hypothesis. You probably did this in school at some point, and then we would collect data, and then we would sort of verify, and then at that point we would either, you know, sort of confirm or refute our hypothesis. And this is where you get into sort of, null hypothesis, which is a statement of basically equality, and then of course a research, or sometimes we call that an alternate hypothesis, which is a statement of typically inequality. So what is a quote unquote theory? So a theory is broadly defined, and again academically defined as a collection of assertions, both verbal and symbolic, that specify how and why variables are related, as well as the conditions in which they should and should not be related. Right. So you can really have a theory on about anything, right? So consider the theory diagram that you see here, right? It explains why two, independent variables, in this case, the quality of a movie script and the fame of its stars, affect a dependent variable, which is how much the movie makes at the box office, right? So you can see the quality of script is kind of tied to the favorability of reviews, which of course is tied to box office receipts, as is the fame of the stars. The more famous they are, the more buzz you generate. That also ties into, is all sort of correlated with um, box office receipts. So consider the theory diagram shown above. We can build a theory similar to the one shown above for each outcome. So we could think about like job satisfaction. We could think about the strain that that job puts on people, employees. We could think about like motivation. Um, do they trust or maybe distrust their supervisor? And thus, sort of a corollary to that, a logical corollary to that is organizational behavior. Is it just common sense, or is there maybe something more to it? So to test our theory, we gather data on the variables included in our hypothesis. We then use variance of the correlation coefficient to test the hypothesis and to see if they verify our theory. The correlation would be as follows. A perfect positive relationship, which frankly never happens, would be a perfect one. That would be where you see a line go, all the way up, all the points sort of perfectly arranged. It would be linear. No relationship at all. Just imagine like a scatter plot with, points everywhere. But you can look at it and say there's no real pattern to those points. They're just randomly distributed. And then a perfect negative relationship would just be, it would look like the first one, the perfect positive, but it would just be downsloping instead of upsloping. Now, what we know about the strength of the correlation is that we can infer from judging the compactness of a scatter plot of the XY values, as I was saying, if it's more compact, then you've got a sort of stronger correlation. If it's less compact, if it's the lines are kind of like this, all over especially all over the place, that would clearly be a weaker correlation. So the correlations from multiple studies get averaged together using what we call meta-analysis. And this is something that I've done and published as a research professor. We look at what we mean by meta-analysis. Maybe a better way of explaining it is, one study says this, one study says that, another study says that. But then what we do is we try to synthesize all those studies together and try to come up with maybe a more formative conclusion based on bringing all that information together. So thus, meta-analysis can then form the foundation for evidence-based management, the use of scientific findings to inform management practice. Well-supported theories become helpful tools for answering why questions, such as, and obviously this is not, again, not an exhaustive list, there's plenty more than this, why your best and worst co-workers act so differently, and why you sometimes think, feel, and act a certain way. All right, so this is a quick video, just a little bit of intro to organizational behavior, a little bit about the sort of the why and the what. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in a future video. Take care.